Well, I didn't expect to be making this video today. Kyrie Irving apparently no longer wants to be a Brooklyn Net. It is shams official as of today. There's been rumors, there's been little things coming out, but once it becomes a shams or a Woj thing, it's a very big deal and it's very real. So essentially, Shams breaks it down and says that the Nets and Kyrie can't come to an agreement on a long-term contract or any kind of way for him to return to the team. We've had rumors for weeks that they are hesitant to sign him to a long-term contract, considering the fact that he barely played this year and the drama that he caused around the team. And even prior to that, his availability due to injury. It has frustrated ownership. It has frustrated the coaching staff. It has frustrated the other players. And in large part, was a big reason why James Harden wanted to leave and ended up in Philadelphia. There's a belief, supposedly, within the organization that had Kyrie Irving decided to play for the entirety of last season, James Harden would still be there, Kyrie would still be in a good standing with the organization, and the three of them could have really challenged for a title last season. And the fact that that didn't happen is being blamed on Kyrie. And as a result, they are, as I said, hesitant to sign him to a long-term extension. And obviously, a player of Kyrie Irving's caliber is going to want a long-term extension, which has prompted him to look at his free agent possibilities. However, given not only the teams that were listed, those being the Knicks, Lakers, and I believe the Clippers were mentioned as well, not just the fact that those are the teams involved, but also just the situation around this, I think a trade is way, way more likely than him signing a free agency contract somewhere. Like, technically, New York could make some salary cap space to sign him outright, but if it's not them, there aren't really any teams out there that I would think Kyrie Irving would want to go play for and sign a free agency contract with amongst teams that have cap space. Teams like Orlando, teams like Portland, San Antonio, that doesn't feel like what he would want to do. Presumably, he would want to play in LA or New York or Chicago or one of the bigger markets, and that comes into play a lot within these trades that you guys sent over to me. So we're going to go through all different kinds of trade possibilities and just break this situation down as a whole. First up is a trade to the Knicks in which Kyrie ends up going to New York in exchange for Derrick Rose, Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier, a second-round pick, and the 11th pick in this draft. And the interesting thing about this deal is that it adds Kyrie to RJ Barrett and Julius Randle. You're not losing either one of those guys, while Brooklyn is still getting back some pieces. Fournier can score, Derrick Rose, when he's healthy, can score. Kemba, I'm not sure what you're getting out of him, but then you get the 11th pick as well. You have the 11th pick. You have two Philadelphia picks into the future. Maybe you can try and make something work to replace some of the value there in exchange for Kyrie Irving. And if you're New York, you get a guard creator in Irving alongside RJ Barrett so that there's not so much offensive responsibility on him as a creator on the perimeter. And obviously that helps open things up for Julius Randle as well. Defensively, they're going to have some issues with that group, but Kyrie with the Knicks, not only in that setting, but then playing against Brooklyn 4 times a year would be really interesting and really exciting. And this isn't the best trade package that was sent over to me in terms of value in exchange for Brooklyn, but it kind of gives you an idea of where we're at value-wise for Kyrie, because his options and his destinations are limited. And I don't think there's a lot of teams that are going to be super excited about bringing him in for the same reasons that it seems like Brooklyn wants to get rid of him. Next up, we have a trade to the Clippers. In this one, the Nets get Marcus Morris, Norman Powell, Zubac, and a 2028 first-round pick from the Clippers in exchange for Kyrie Irving. So this one helps Brooklyn in a sense of like something they really need. They desperately, even with Ben Simmons healthy, like they desperately need wings. They need guys that can guard and guys that can shoot and provide them size. And you can imagine a lineup of KD, Ben Simmons, Morris, Powell, and then whoever you want the fifth guy to be as a really versatile, switchable lineup that provides spacing around Simmons as he would take on much more offensive responsibility without Kyrie Irving there. And that creates a really interesting situation for them, in addition to having this first-round pick on down into 2028, which you could use or you could use as a trade asset, again, alongside those Philadelphia picks to maybe bring in someone else, because presumably the idea here is still to contend and try and win titles, even if you do end up trading Kyrie. And the Clippers, this idea of having Kawhi, Paul George, and Kyrie has been floated for a little bit, and it's really, really intriguing, because if there's two star players in the league that on paper will be able to cover up for some of the defensive liabilities that Kyrie Irving presents, those two guys are Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And on nights that one or both of them are not playing particularly well, or there just isn't a good enough flow, it's hard to find a just go get me a bucket guard as good as Kyrie Irving in the entire league that gets him into an LA situation. Again, the Lakers, I believe the Clippers and the Knicks were mentioned in this tweet and in this article by Shams. those feel like realistic destinations in terms of places that Kyrie would actually want to go. And I think this makes at least a decent amount of sense. I think this is where we're at. Next up now is a 4-team trade involving Utah, Oklahoma City, Minnesota, and Brooklyn. I put this trade on screen because a lot of people really liked this one. A lot of people thought that this was a balanced trade. It was a trade that made sense for a lot of, for all the teams involved. Brooklyn gets D'Lo to get some guard help. These other teams are getting what they need. But this was put on screen because it illustrates the fact that this, more so than the first two trades I've shown, probably make the most sense for all these different teams involved. But it can't happen. It's not going to happen. There is a 0% chance, in my opinion, that Kyrie ends up somewhere like Utah or if not a different version of this, somewhere like Minnesota or Oklahoma City. Like there's just a 0. I think he would honestly retire before he would do that, because he has the option to go sign somewhere in free agency if he really just wants to leave in general. And I just don't see any of these places being where Kyrie would want to play. And I understand that he's a different kind of guy. Maybe he doesn't care that much about, where he ends up playing. I think he does. I think there's a reason why he chose Brooklyn. It wasn't just to play with Kyrie. I think he wants to be in one of the bigger markets in the league, as most stars do. And so even though this kind of structure is a trade that might make a good amount of sense for all teams involved, the player that we're dealing with here, I don't think allows for this kind of trade to happen. Speaking of those bigger markets, but not one that was mentioned in the tweet by Shams, in this trade, Kyrie ends up going to Miami in exchange for Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, Amir Yurtseven, and 2 first-round picks, including their pick this year at 27th overall. In comparison to the other deals, this is too much value in exchange for Kyrie Irving for Miami to be giving up. Because in my opinion, it would have to be either Tyler Hero or Kyle Lowry. For them to give up the entirety of their what is basically their starting backcourt, Hero comes off the bench, but he's one of their best guards. For them to give up that and two first-round picks in exchange for a guy in Irving that I'm not sure fits super well in Miami in terms of all the Heat culture stuff and the fact they asked people to guard, and they brought in Kyle Lowry in part because he's good buddies with Jimmy Butler, and just breaking that up would be weird. But I also understand that if you took Lowry out of the trade and it was Hero and 2 firsts, that's, 1, still might be too much, and 2, you're just going to have Kyle Lowry, Kyrie, and Jimmy Butler all out there at the same time. And then if you take away Hero and you do Kyle Lowry, well, then you still have the same issue with Tyler Hero, Kyrie Irving, Jimmy Butler. 2 of those guys can't guard, and all 3 of them are going to want the basketball. And so I think, theoretically, the market makes sense for Kyrie, but I'm not sure it's a great team fit, nor is it a place that I think makes sense from a value standpoint in terms of having to give up this much to bring in Kyrie. And so after looking through all these trades you guys sent me, I even with the rumors, and maybe I'm just being naive here, I still kind of feel like there's a way that this works out. If someone can show me the Knicks trade or the Lakers trade or some other mystery free agency destination that makes sense for Kyrie and makes sense for Brooklyn, then I'll start to really buy into this idea. This is obviously concerning, and it's obviously not fantastic that you built this thing around these 3 guys and potentially 2 of them could be gone in a 5-month span. That's not fantastic. But from a basketball and a financial standpoint, I still think Brooklyn makes the most sense. And this is probably Brooklyn's way of trying to leverage their way into a situation where Kyrie opts in or they get him on a 2-year deal, whatever the case may be. Report after report has said that they don't want to commit long-term to Kyrie Irving. He's not getting the 5-year max. He's just not. But that doesn't mean that he can't get the 2-year max. It doesn't mean that he can't opt in and maybe position himself better for free agency in 2023. And unless it's a Westbrook thing, I can't imagine that KD's going to want to play with Westbrook unless there's some kind of Clippers wings trade here that makes some kind of sense. Kyrie committed to Brooklyn and he wanted to play with KD, and it's just weird to think about him possibly leaving. But here's the bottom line. Here, if you want to go and talk about all the trade stuff like we have and read the Shams report, all that's fine. This makes 0 sense for Brooklyn. I've said it in other videos. I understand that it's frustrating that Kyrie Irving made a decision that could have potentially ruined this era of Brooklyn Nets basketball. If Kyrie plays the entire season, Harden probably doesn't want to ask out. You have those 3 guys, and you saw how devastating they were last year, or 2 years ago, I guess, at this point. I understand that that's frustrating, but you can't react emotionally. The bottom line is, in any Kyrie Irving trade, Brooklyn will not get back the same level of value in exchange for him that he is as a basketball player. And I understand that availability is a question mark for him, whether it be injury or otherwise, and there is baggage there. But he wants to play with Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is signed to a massive long-term extension. I don't understand why you would screw that up. I understand being frustrated. I understand being irritated. I understand that it's a weird situation. But if you are trying to win basketball games and you are trying to compete for a title, Kyrie Irving on your team gives you the best chance to be able to do that rather than moving him for what is probably, in terms of his talent, going to be 50, 60, maybe 70% value in exchange for Kyrie Irving, realistically, given his limited free agency options and given what is probably a very limited list in terms of destination teams that he would like to go to. Not to mention the fact that if you do trade Kyrie, you really, really risk the possibility of upsetting Kevin Durant and him then asking out as well, and then everything is completely ruined. I don't understand why you wouldn't just say, hey, Kyrie, that like really didn't appreciate last year. Here's the 3-year deal. It's the full max. Take it, or you can opt in. We're not trading you. You could, if you want to go play for Orlando, or you want to go play for Portland, go for it. Like, that's totally fine. But what we would like to do is we would like to try and compete for a title next year. That involves you coming back. That involves Joe Harris being healthy. That involves Ben Simmons being healthy and Kevin Durant being on the basketball team. You can't tell me that there's a situation out there for Kyrie Irving in free agency that allows him to compete on a higher level than that roster next year. And I can't understand why Brooklyn would go in a different direction than that, unless, as I've theorized in other videos, this is an ownership decision. The guy that's cutting the checks to Kyrie Irving to play 25 regular season games, and the guy that's cutting the check to pay the luxury tax and trying to compete for titles and is getting swept in the first round instead and hasn't made a conference finals since these guys showed up and had to deal with all the James Harden stuff and all the Ben Simmons stuff. Unless that guy gets so mad and so irritated and so emotional about this that he decides that he does that he no longer wants Kyrie Irving on the basketball team, if that happens, then there's nothing you can do about that. That, in my opinion, has to be what's happening here, because continually, despite the frustration, despite the emotion, from a basketball standpoint, this makes no sense.